2025 was an insane year for paleontological discoveries. So much was discovered. There were so many papers published. Our understanding of life in the past had grown exponentially, and it was really an exciting time. It's also that time of year to kind of look back at all of those amazing discoveries and sort of reflect, kind of go over what was established, what was published, and see how much our understanding has improved. Of course, that is PaleoRewind. For those of you who don't know, PaleoRewind is this really awesome sort of event that is organized by Edge Science, where a bunch of paleo content creators come together to sort of break down the year month by month, so it's a little bit more digestible, and kind of go over some of the more major discoveries that happened over the course of these last 12 months. It's always a really exciting time to be a paleo fan because you get to look at the year as a whole and see what all happened. And this year, I was fortunate enough to be invited, which I'm so excited about. I will be covering the month of January, which already starts off strong. There's already so many incredible discoveries that happened in the month of January, ranging from a brand new dinosaur being identified from photos and descriptions alone to North America's oldest known dinosaur being found. There's a lot of really cool things for us to cover, so I'm not going to bore you any longer. We'll just get into the video. To start us off, a large dinosaur trackway was discovered in the UK within the Oxfordshire Quarry. This is the largest track site ever recorded in the UK, with it reaching a length of around 150 meters. The footprints that are identified here are sauropod and theropod footprints. Of course, the sauropod footprints, as you could probably guess, are absolutely massive, and the theropod footprints are thought to belong to Megalosaurus, or a very close relative. As far as what the footprints were doing, of course, that's not exactly clear. It does seem like the theropod footprints do overlap with the sauropod footprints, so they might have been following them, but we don't know exactly what was going on. It's still a huge and very exciting discovery. North America also discovered a new potential candidate for the oldest dinosaur to come from North America, or from Laurasia, really. The dinosaur in question is known as Avidum bonduvici. This little fella was uncovered in Wyoming back in 2013 and was finally described this year. It could reach an estimated length of around 3 feet and a height of 1 foot, which is smaller than Eoraptor, which is another basal sauropodomorph. Discoveries like this are always really cool because, I mean, for one, knowing some of the oldest dinosaurs to ever exist is always just very exciting. It's always very exciting. But I also really love finding basal sauropodomorphs because of how different they are from the later sauropods that we all know and love, like, you know, Argentinosaurus and things like that. This guy was tiny. It was a tiny little dinosaur that was, in a way, sort of the precursor to the much larger behemoths that we're more familiar with. Always just very exciting stuff. To step away from dinosaurs for a little bit, there was a study published this year that looked to kind of answer the question on whether or not large ground sloths like Megatherium and Arematherium were hairy or if they were more sparse with their hair. So for some context for this, giant ground sloths were huge. Like Megatherium and Arematherium were comparable in size to elephants. And elephants, as you probably know, don't have a lot of fur, and that's because elephants live in a warmer environment. Too much fur would probably be like, it really wouldn't be beneficial for a large animal like an elephant. So the question did remain, would giant ground sloths even need fur? Well, the study actually looked at the metabolism of giant ground sloths, and it found that they could certainly get away with it, especially the ones that lived in a cooler environment like Megatherium. Megatherium most likely did have fur, but it was also noted that an animal like Arematherium was probably still hairless, given the fact that it lived in a warmer environment. This is something that was showcased in prehistoric planet Ice Age, where we see this giant, hairless Arematherium. You know, again, Arematherium was in a more warm environment, so less fur would probably make sense for the animal, but Megatherium, there's a good chance that Megatherium was still pretty hairy. Next up is the discovery of Tamaryraptor. This is probably one of the most fascinating discoveries of this month, or maybe even this year in general. And that's just because of how it was discovered. So Tamaryraptor, its fossils were uncovered by Ernst Stromer and his team back in 1914. I'm sure that many of you heard the name Ernst Stromer and you automatically knew where this was going. Of course, he brought his fossils back, and eventually World War II began, and the museum that contained much of Stromer's collection was destroyed, along with these new fossils, the Spinosaurus fossils too, but these new fossils that we're talking about right now. Now, since then, those fossils were assigned to Carcharodontosaurus, a Carcharodontosaurid that lived in North Africa during the late Cretaceous. But recently, there was some analysis done on Stromer's description of those fossils and the photos that were taken of those fossils, and there was a different conclusion reached. These fossils are different from Carcharodontosaurus. They are distinct. They are still Carcharodontosaurids, but just a different one. This new animal has been named Temeriraptor markgraffi. Much like other Carcharodontosaurids, it probably had a fairly similar anatomy about it. It probably had a similar looking body, and overall its skull shape was likely decently similar. But one thing that helped it stand out was the fact that it had a very interesting nasal structure. That's one of those things that helped make this distinct from Carcharodontosaurus, is that Carcharodontosaurus doesn't have that. The structure might have looked like a horn or maybe some sort of small crest on its nose, but either way, it was still very different from pretty much any other large Carcharodontosaurid that we know of. And if you ask me, it's really an exciting discovery. This fellow would have lived with other large dinosaurs like Spinosaurus, of course, much like Carcharodontosaurus did, but it really does stand out from the rest of the crowd. And then finally, at the very end of January, there was a paper published that was describing a brand new ornithomimid known as Mexadrachon longimanus. Now, this fella is so fascinating because of its hands. Now, okay, so first some context behind this animal. It lived in the late Cretaceous of what is now Coahuila, Mexico, and it was discovered in the Cerro del Pueblo Formation. And it was just so unique because of its long hands. It had these long hands with, of course, decently long claws, which is very different from other types of ornithomimids that we're quite familiar with. In terms of its whole body plan, it was likely pretty similar to other ornithomimids, long neck, relatively small head, and probably covered in feathers. But it's also worth mentioning that it probably wasn't as speedy as other ornithomimids. It doesn't seem like its legs were quite built for that. So it's not as fast as other ornithomimids, and it has these long hands. Now, the hands were likely used to help scoop up vegetation and things like that. There's also been some art out there released that shows them kind of using them against fish, which is just really funny imagery and just, I don't know, it's very interesting stuff. And it's just a really amazing discovery, like a strange discovery in a family that's already kind of on the side of being a little bit strange. 2025 in general had so many fantastic discoveries. So be sure to check that stuff out because it is definitely going to be worth it. So that was January of 2025. Some of the more major discoveries and of course some of the most notable ones of this month. If you ask me, it was certainly an exciting way to start off the year.